Morsels of a Thought, 1860. This is Ying Yang in California. Good day, everybody. How are you doing? I want to bring more virtue into the world. And when I do that, I have to bring thoughts of wisdom from other people because since I'm not wise, I read what these wise people have to say through their life experiences, and what they say through their life experiences is crazy good. So I'm going to start with Issues That Matter by George J. Chanos, A Mindset Millennial Samurai, Book One, A Mindset for the 21st Century. Uh, so it's actually, the title is actually Millennial Samurai, A Mindset for the 21st Century, if you write that down. And this is book one. He intends to write more. Issues That Matter. That's where our little bookmark is. Public corruption. Okay, so try to pick up wisdom and use it to make it a great day and make it so that you do something with virtue in it. Public corruption. John Acton, who is an English historian, politician, and writer, says power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Oh boy. James Wolfensohn, 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 the former chairman of the World Bank, warned in his farewell speech that, to the bank 2 decades ago that the problem that disturbed him the most when contemplating the future of the world economy was corruption. We often hear of large capital outflows from countries like Russia that go into offshore banking centers that act as money launderers. We've also seen the rapid rise in cryptocurrencies that facilitate such transfers. Leaders like Putin, Xi, Mugabe, Chavez, and Maduro have ignored, modified, or circumvented their own constitutions in order to enrich and entrench themselves at the expense of those they claim to represent. They are These national resources are optimally allocated for the benefit of society as a whole. They are simply stolen by the ruling elite. Public corruption in the United States is no better. The cost per mile to extend the was New York Second Avenue subway was 4 times the cost per mile to construct the new Crossrail Underground in London. Why? Why must contractors in New York pay 30% more for concrete than anywhere else? The answer is unethical and or illegal agreements between construction contractors, public sector unions, criminal organizations, and government agencies. The costs of these practices to consumers is not only higher construction costs, but also significant and often even more costly delays, some that can last for decades. Now, elected officials are rarely held accountable for such corruption. Other forms of corruption are explained away as policy ignorance on the part of our legislators. One of the greatest economic problems confronting the United States today is the problem of unfunded entitlements, benefits which, having been granted, can never be retracted. This is true for the federal government and for state and local governments, many of which are or could be facing bankruptcy due to their inability to fund these ever increasing deficits. When officials are asked how this could happen, the most frequent explanation is, we didn't realize how bad the situation was. We didn't realize how bad the situation was. This is either a lie or evidence of gross negligence. Many have been shouting warnings for more than 40 years. The reality is that legislators bought votes from the public by promising ever increasing benefits that succeeding generations can never afford to pay. In doing so, they created unfunded pensions and liabilities whose present value is around $80 trillion, or 4 times the nation's current $21 trillion treasury debt. What people fail to appreciate is that the currency of corruption in elected office is not money, but votes. That's by James L. Buckley, American jurist, politician, and author. He said, "What people fail to appreciate is that the currency of corruption in elected office is not money, but votes." James L. Buckley. The public treasury, and with it our future economic security, has been traded for votes. This has been happening for decades, if not centuries, and is continuing at our collective expense. I'm going to pause here to mention an example of what he's saying, because my parents ran a company, and in that company, it was gasoline stations and uh, apartment rentals. So there was a company name for the oil area, and there was a company name for the apartments area. Well, we donated money to Dianne Feinstein, who was then senator or mayor of San Francisco, and Dianne Feinstein's office wrote back to say, "I cannot accept your donation because of oil interests. However, if you have a different fund, we can accept the donation from a different fund." So we went and changed the check. We went to a different check and wrote the same amount and sent it to her. And there was some kind of promise that my dad had elicited from the office, which was something that would keep our business afloat. So, yes, people do sometimes do that, but I have a query about what happens if people have to rely on that. Small companies, mom and pop company. Um, it's been sold. Anyway, so back to George J. Chanos. We are reading Millennial Samurai, a mindset for the 21st century, book 1. And he is very wise. We are learning the right things to do, because the right things to do is a form of wisdom, knowing what they are, and then going to other people to get some wisdom. It's simple. You don't have to go through their life experience to get the knowledge that they are giving you. So this is why you have to treasure books like these. Like, certain books are thousands of times better than the books right next to them on the shelf with a different author with a similar last name that they're listed by authors. Okay. The public treasury, back to the book. The public treasury, and with it our future economic security. What's that sound? Has been traded for votes. This has been happening for decades, if not centuries, and it's continuing at our collective expense. There is also the discrepancy in retirement benefits paid to government workers versus private sector workers. The benefit increases that public sector employees enjoy has risen at 3 times the rate of those in the private sector. The benefit packages for members of the United States Congress are even worse. They receive lavish lifetime retirement benefits, including very low cost comprehensive health care coverage, not to mention exemption from regular FICA taxes, FICA. For decades, we have acquiesced to this outright theft from the public treasury. What we have been allowing to happen is nothing short of the wholesale mortgaging of our future and our children's future by corrupt and or incompetent politicians. Will Rogers is an American humorist, newspaper columnist, and social commentator. Will Rogers says, the more you observe politics, the more you have to admit that each party is worse than the other. In other words, it's a never ending debate who's worse and who's better. So it's a waste of our life time and energy to go into the politics and 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 refute each other. It's too hard to come out of that to get the country back in order. Okay. Uh, That's just my commentary on Will Rogers's quote. The more you observe politics, the more you have to admit that each party is worse than the other. Will Rogers, American humorist, newspaper columnist, and social commentator. Democratic politicians buy votes by approving public sector pension and retirement packages that are unsustainable and by promising their constituents entitlements that require ever increasing taxation. They require ever increasing taxation, while Republicans allow their contributors to strip the nation of its natural resources by allowing unrestricted environmental exploitation. In both cases, these concessions are traded for financial contributions and political support. And in both cases, this is outright fraud. No political party should be allowed to use the public treasury to solicit or secure votes. And no political party should be allowed to mortgage our children's future to get elected. Oh. Politicians who engage in these activities need to be held accountable and restrained. Bono, an Irish singer songwriter and philanthropist, says, the worst disease in the world today is corruption, and there is a cure: transparency. Millennial Samurai will need to address the issue of public corruption by making structural changes to our political system that promote greater transparency and accountability. Economic inequality is chapter 130. America is experiencing the biggest income and wealth disparity in nearly 100 years. 7 of the richest men in America are among the 10 richest people in the world. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and Mark Zuckerberg now control more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans. Nearly half of men ages 18 to 34 now live with their parents, the highest level since the Great Depression. 78% of the United States population now lives paycheck to paycheck with essentially zero savings. In 2018, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, a record number of Americans, 7 million, were 90 days or more behind on their auto loans. This is a troubling statistic. Auto loan payments, like rent, are usually prioritized. People need their cars to get to work, and people can't sleep in their cars if necessary. I once did that. Gonna pause here. I once did that. I had 3 jobs, and yet, because none of the jobs was willing to hire me full time in order to give me health benefits, I had to, I had to sustain 3 sets of politics in the jobs, on the jobs, and sleep in my car. And this was in California, and the wealth disparity was high. I could not afford a room, and the rooms cost at least $650 to 12 or 13 or $1,400 for a room in a house, or a room or a rental. So it was hard. Um, knowing the right things to do is a form of wisdom. So the right thing to do here is, well, here's inequality, transparency. Remember what he said here? Okay, back to the book. America has, the book is Millennial Samurai, A Mindset for the 21st Century, Book 1, tells you morsels of a thought of wisdom. America has historically experienced rising wages. It was the foundation of the middle class. For millions of Americans, life got better with each year as the value of their wages increased and our economy grew. This is no longer happening. The middle class is disappearing. For most Americans, real wages have been stagnant or falling for decades. Now, I personally am an example of coming from a middle class family. I came from an upper middle class family. We lived in a mansion, and it was I fell from grace. I fell from grace and had to work as an unskilled laborer, and it was hard. We had to separate, and I slept in my car. And one person got all the wealth of the inheritance, so I am not in the middle class. Okay. Look, and my parents have died, so that means the middle class has disappeared in that sense, and there's one left out of four. Okay. Low income. Okay, here's a boldface from here. Low income earners now make less in real terms than they did in 1980. And middle income earners make just 6% more than they made then in real terms. So they're talking about low income people and middle income people. And so somebody who can buy an apple in 1980 can no longer buy the whole apple. You see? Okay, that's what's going on with the low income earners. That's my example for Mr. Chanos's statement. Okay. And middle income earners make just 6% more than they made then in real terms. Instead of earning more over time, people are actually earning less in terms of what their wages can actually buy. Investments in financial assets have dramatically increased the wealth and incomes of the wealthiest Americans, while average Americans are worse off than they were decades ago. Many blame private equity. Since 2008, private equity has quintupled to $5 trillion. Diane Standard of the Center of Responsible Lending, RL Capital, their superpower is their obscurity. Private equity firms borrow heavily to buy companies. They often sell off company assets or cut jobs to generate the cash required to repay the loans and pay shareholder dividends to investors. Workers are typically harmed by these actions. Now, I have an example. I'll give you the example after his example. At Toys R Us is his example. 30,000 workers lost their jobs in 2018. Many had worked at the company for years. Sears, Radio Shack, and Claire's were all gutted by private equity in the same year. Now, my example is of a middle class man and his partner making a game for Microsoft that Microsoft purchased. But Microsoft also took these two men and said in the contract that they must work for Microsoft for 2 years after they sell the product. Now, the product was all the games on Microsoft were done by my friends. The games on Microsoft, the Solitaire, uh, uh, poker, and hearts. I know those were done by my friends. And the thing is that the intellectual property of these two men would now require Microsoft ownership. instead of their own ownership. So they basically got bought out and wiped out. So that means that the corporation of Microsoft grew while the middle class mom and pop or individual entrepreneurs fell in numbers. Okay, back to the book. Life is hard for millions of Americans. Most people are forced to borrow just to keep up. Historically, the average American had very little debt outside of a mortgage on their first home. But after almost 40 years of declining real wages, Americans now have to go into serious debt for just about everything they buy. Americans now have nearly $13 trillion in total debt, more than $1.5 trillion in college debt, over $1 trillion in credit card debt, and more than $1 trillion in auto loan debt, all record highs. The debt load for the working poor has nearly quadrupled in the past 20 years as a percentage of their income. And most of this debt will never be repaid. Most of this debt will never be repaid. We now have the highest ever percentage of people on food stamps, double the historical rate. In some I am. In some states, nearly 10% of working age adults receive disability payments. I do. From 1973 to 2016, net productivity rose 73.7%, while hourly wages essentially stagnated, increasing only 12.5% over 43 years. Americans are working more productively than ever, while the fruits of their labor have accrued to corporate officers, directors, and their shareholders. Even though there's been an enormous amount of wealth created by our economy, life for average Americans hasn't improved. The average worker has gotten poorer, while the cost of just about everything has gone up. Moreover, no matter how big the gains in productivity have been, the government and the Federal Reserve have continuously created more money. They've done it by creating new credit and by simply printing trillions of new dollars out of thin air. This new money has caused prices to rise more than productivity. Because wages are no longer connected to gains in productivity, there's nothing the average American can do to stay ahead of inflation. So most Americans have been forced to borrow in a way that is unprecedented in our history. For those who have taken on these incredible new debt loads, life is very stressful. This group is growing, and this stress and anger is building, ultimately fueling many of today's biggest issues. Okay, so we are going to talk about how we've seen protests all over the country next time. And I'm going to say that my cousin worked at a gaming company, and he didn't know about inflation. So I said to him one day about the apple, I said, you need to get inflation raises every year because prices go up. And if you could buy some apples, you can't buy that many apples the next time. So you have to ask for an inflation raise, and an adjustment. And in the meantime, also ask for a different raise. So it would be more than that. But there we go. Okay. All right. So we've got some ideas about what's going on, and that if you do things that you know are the right things to do, that's actually virtue. And I thank people like George J. Chanos for bringing virtue into the world. Okay. Wisdom into the world. Old Kinderhook.